Okay, guys, welcome to this lesson, an introduction to multimodal composition, where we're going to talk about the modes and we're going to talk about meta-language. Meta-language basically being the jargon or the glossary terms that we use in multimodal composition, in film production, in film editing. We'll learn a little bit of the jargon there. I guess the learning objectives here, I want you to be able to distinguish between the modes when you see multimodal text, and the modes are the linguistic, visual, oral, spatial, and gestural. We'll talk about each of them shortly. We also want to learn some of the glossary terms, this meta language that we use in multimodal composition. If you're familiar with video editing or photo editing, you'll probably pick up on some of this already. You probably know these terms. And then we want to start thinking about the modes when we plan our own projects. So not just, I want to make a video. I want you to be thinking, how can I use the gestural mode in this video to emphasize what it is that I'm trying to say, or to help people understand what it is that I'm trying to do? So we want to start planning to use the modes in our own projects. In this first example here, notice the poster in the Pulp Fiction. We're just kind of look at the elements going on here. Notice that we have some visual effects. We have this kind of worn, weathered, crinkled, wrinkled, worn look in the on the right-hand side of the poster, and kind of throughout the poster. It gives this a kind of an old, worn feel, as if we're looking at an old magazine cover. We have linguistic elements going on here. The terms pulp fiction is also a reference to a genre of, I guess, cheap fiction that was printed on cheap pulp paper back in the day. And you know that it's old. It's 10 cents. I don't think that you can buy anything for 10 cents anymore, but we have that going on. Also notice we have some visual elements going on. The subject's face is centered in the image. And notice that her face and the gun and that part of the image is highlighted in kind of a warm light, and it's in sharp focus. And then as you move away from what they want us to focus on, things get a little cooler, a little bluer, and a little less in focus. So we're using this split toning to emphasize the subject and what we want the viewer to see. Some other things that going on here, we have in the gestural mode, which deals with facial expression and body language. Notice that her feet are crossed, which suggests that she's relaxed. Also notice that she's looking directly at the camera. So you're the viewer, and she's looking directly at you. She's making eye contact with you. Another interesting thing when we talk about body language, she has one hand covering this magazine on the bed, as if she doesn't want you to see what she's reading or to see what she has. And then the way that this character holds the cigarette is distinctive. A lot of people hold cigarettes, not very many people smoke anymore, but people who still smoke hold cigarettes differently. So the way that she is holding her cigarette, it suggests... it just suggests something, almost a sophistication, maybe even European, the way that she's holding that cigarette. So those say things about the character. They convey meaning. And then we have some spatial elements going on here. Notice that the shoes, her high heel shoes, are in front of the linguistic element. So that creates a spatial element as if she's popping out. And also, another element of the spatial mode here is the camera angle. She's looking up at us and we're looking down at her. Usually that would suggest that we have power over the subject if we're looking down at them and they're looking up at us, and that is a spatial element. It situates the viewer and the subject in the image. But here, right, she also has a gun, right? So it's almost as if the viewer just walked into this subject's bedroom. She looked up at us like, what do you want? I would just assume shoot you. So these modes, the way these modes are put together for this movie poster, they tell a story. They tell us a lot, and being able to pick these modes out and kind of give us an idea of how we can use modes ourselves when we create our own projects. Also, next to this, you'll notice there's a sheet from a written essay. We don't usually think of essays as multimodal, but they are. They don't use gestural, they don't use sound, they don't use spatial, really. But when you look at a sheet, right, we use white paper and we use black font that creates nice contrast. It makes it easy for the reader to read the essay. We indent the first line of each paragraph to emphasize that a new idea is starting. We have margins, and sometimes we introduce charts and graphs. We use titles. We have page numbers. All of these things make an essay multimodal to some extent. It's not just pure linguistic only. So just keep that in mind. There is some multimodality to a written essay also. But we, in this class, and for your first major assignment, the descriptive report, we are looking at what you may call multimedia text. We're looking at texts that use different modes, obviously different modes. So these different modes, the elements of a text, contribute to its meaning. And that something you want to keep in mind is how you use the modes when you produce text and how the modes are used in the text that you consume. Those modes have been combined purposefully to convey meaning to you or to convey a message to you. They say things. They add to what we see. They add to what we hear. The elements of a multimodal text are known as the modes, and they are linguistic, which is a use of words and letters and signs. They are also visual, which is use of colors, shapes, oral, which is a nice way of saying sound, which is use of sound effects and ambient sound effects, voiceovers. The spatial mode is how the subject and the viewer are placed, how subjects in an image are placed between themselves, how different elements in a text are situated amongst themselves. So the spatial mode. And then the gestural mode is body language, facial expression, eye contact, how all of these modes are combined to make meaning is kind of what we're learning in this class, and what you're going to be doing in your first major project is distinguishing how the modes are used to make meaning in whatever text it is that you decide to analyze. The linguistic mode includes the following elements that contribute to a text meaning. Of course, word choice, and then the tone and the connotations of those words. The spoken and linguistic is not only written and can be spoken also. This voiceover that you're hearing right now is a linguistic element of this video, but it's also an oral element. So we'll talk about that in a minute too. The organization, how words are organized. And here I'm just kind of going off the cuff. I'm going slide by slide and recording the voiceover. So you're going to hear a lot of uhs, some pauses. I may get in there and cut this around and post a little bit so it's not so bad. But the way things are organized. And then you have a relationship between the words and other elements of the text. So remember in Pulp Fiction, the Pulp Fiction poster, let me go back to that. In this Pulp Fiction poster, the subject is in front of the linguistic element, and we know that because her shoes have been masked out to be in front of those words. It's in front of the banner also. So here's a spatial element, and this is also linguistic, how the linguistics relate to the subject. If the text were in front of the shoes, then we would know that she is in the magazine instead of out of the magazine, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. But just think we got some spatial elements going on, and we're using the subject, the visual subject, and the linguistic title to create this spatial element. So that we get some overlapping here, and I'm going to talk about this. Keep talking about this overlapping. It keeps coming up over and over again. So we'll talk about that. Let's get back to where we were. So when we get to the visual mode, this includes the following elements, and it's color and or the absence of color. So a creator might purposefully decide to not use color to maybe create some type of emptiness, or to signify death, or to signify the past, right? You've seen movies where we go back in the past and the movie goes from full color to black and white. That's to tell the reader, hey, this is something that happened. I mean, the viewer, hey, this is something that happened in the past. Also, the visual modes deals with the layout and design of whatever it is that we're seeing. Its style, like in the Pulp Fiction poster, this kind of vintage pulpy magazine cover type of style that we had going on here, this nostalgia that we're trying to get from the poster, the size and the aspect ratio. So if you're watching this on a tablet or on a computer monitor, you're watching it in 1080p I'm gonna get my here 14 by 6. Never mind. You're watching kind of a widescreen, right? If you were watching this on a cell phone, this aspect ratio would be compressed to fit on your cell phone, unless you turn your cell phone sideways, right? And then you can watch it in its original aspect ratio. Also, visual mode deals with perspective, framing, the use of setting. In the Pulp Fiction poster, we're in a bedroom. We know that there's a lamp in the upper left corner. The subject is laying on a bed. I think there was a window in the background. And then how the subject is placed. Is the subject in the center? Are they off to the left? Are they very close to the camera, far away from the camera? And then also how we use focus to create depth of field. Is the subject in focus or out of focus? And what is in focus? That's probably what they want you to pay attention to, are the things that are in focus. And then the clarity and the clarity of the image. Is it sharp? Is it crisp? Is it pixelated? Does it look bad? And then the use of VFX, which are visual effects, and we'll talk about those shortly. So a little dip for a minute into some meta language. Meta language, like I said, is a fancy way of jargon or terms that groups of people use. I just mentioned VFX, which basically stands for visual effects. When you are writing something down, when you're jotting down a note, it's faster to write down VFX than it is to write down visual effects. So a lot of times when you're watching videos or people talk about VFX, or you'll see it in the comments, this is what they mean. And visual effects are using glows, mirroring, using transform tools, using other things in a video to change its appearance, right, or to cause some or create some type of effect. When we get depth of field, basically we're talking about what areas are in focus. Depth of field, I can be in focus, and then the person 1 foot behind me, it can be blurred out, or I can be in focus and the building a half a mile away behind me can be in focus also. So this depth of field, how far do you want the viewer to see? How far can the viewer see? And how can you use that to make meaning in a multimodal project? And then subject placement, where on the screen or on the page is the subject, right? The person or the object that you want your viewers to focus on. So when we talk about subject placement, depth of field, VFX, these are terms we're throwing around. Kind of familiarize yourself with them, get an idea of what they mean. You may already know what some of them mean, so just work on that. Pay attention to these types of terms that we're using here, and I think I have some more stuff like this for you to look at. The oral mode. This includes the following elements: the use of music, SFX, Foley sounds, the use of ambient sounds and noises. Silence is also considered an oral element, or an element of the oral mode. We use silence purposefully to convey meaning and to make meaning. Also tone, or the closeness of the voice. Right now I'm further away from the microphone, and I'm facing the ceiling, and you probably cannot hear me as well. Or I could get really close to the microphone like this and creep you out. So they were talking about tone and closeness, and here we're using the oral element to create a spatial element. We have also volume, pitch, stereo, mono, surround effects, and then emphasis and accent. Emphasis, we use oral modes for emphasis and accent, but we can also just change tones of voice to do that as well. Some more jargon: if VFX stands for video effects, then SFX stands for sound effects, and reverb, echo, distortion. We have Foley sounds. Those are sounds created for specific use. We may crunch some lettuce in front of a microphone to make this crackling sound to play over something. You may take a microphone outside and record your own footsteps walking through the leaves, so you can add those footstep sounds into some video that you've created. And then we have ambient sounds, which you could probably hear some in this video. Room tones, the air conditioner blowing in the background, wind blowing. A lot of times you'll hear wind blowing, and that's to signify that it's cold outside. You may hear distant traffic or people playing in a park in the background, silverware clinking in a restaurant. All of these things are ambient sounds, and we just add those and overlay those in our videos so that they help place the viewer where we want them to be. The spatial mode. Okay, the spatial mode includes elements such as the arrangement and the organization of elements on a screen or on a page, the proximity of the elements between themselves and in relation to the viewer and the hearer, and then sometimes with partitions and boundaries that are used to separate elements from other elements, or subjects from viewers, like people standing on a balcony looking down. The balcony separates the subject from the viewer, and then also the subject is placed higher than the viewer, so we have this kind of power dynamic going on. We're below them, they're above us, we're looking up to them, they're looking down at us. These spatial elements. How can we use spatial elements to help emphasize or reinforce the message that we're trying to create in our multimodal text is a question we want to be asking. And then the gestural mode includes facial expressions, eye movement and or gaze, hand gestures. You can't see me right now, but my hands are going crazy while I'm talking into this microphone to you. You can't even see me, but just imagine that my hands are moving. Body language and positioning. And if I look at you with my arms crossed, it suggests that I'm in a defensive position, that I'm guarding myself from you. When mama puts her hands on her hips and looks down at you, you did something wrong and you're in trouble. This body language that we're familiar with. You may all be familiar, when we talk about facial expressions, one of my favorite memes is the bruh meme with the little kid that makes the face like, what? You may know what I'm talking about, you may not. I'm just rambling now. And then distance and interaction between people, or between people and other objects or elements. So what we're talking about here is how close are two people in an image? Right? Are they very close to each other? If we see two people sitting on a park bench, are they on opposite ends of the park bench? Maybe they don't know each other very well. Are they sitting right next to each other? They must know each other very well. Sometimes you'll get images of people with their backs to one another. This is use of body language and interaction between people to suggest that there's some conflict going on right now. Sometimes you might see someone is shivering, right? And that means there's an unseen chill, but that's how they're conveying to us that it's cold outside, right? Because someone is shivering. So they're using the gestural mode, they're using body language to say, hey, it's cold in this scene. So here's what we want to do now. We're just going to go through these videos. It's the same video over and over again, but I start adding modes to it. First, we're going to watch the video straight out of camera. And OOC, if you ever see OOC in comments in videos where someone's saying, well, OOC, it was this, or I just display in this OOC, that's straight out of camera. That means they recorded it and took it straight out of the camera and published it and didn't do anything to it. No edits, no corrections, no color grades, no effects, nothing. And so what we're looking at here, this first image is straight out of camera. Pay attention to the sounds, pay attention to the shot, pay attention to the focus. Just watch what's going on and see what you can pick up with this straight out of camera shot.
Look at yourself.
Okay, so that's the end of that shot. This really, really good looking fella, who happens to be me, walks out of this building, walks up to the camera, walks into focus, looks at the camera and tells you to look at yourself, and then takes their sunglasses off. So we don't really get a whole lot going on here. The image isn't overexposed, it's not underexposed, the camera doesn't move, the sound, you can hear what I'm saying, but the sound isn't great. Did you notice the sound of the voice? It was okay, but it wasn't super great. So let's move to the next slide. Now we're going to add linguistic mode elements to this video. This includes written titles and spoken words, which means I'm going to do a voiceover. So let's see if we can start to make a little bit more sense of what this video is trying to tell us. And I'll hit play right now.
I walk. I contemplate life by myself in my yard. I wear mirrored sunglasses to metaphorically declare my own reflectiveness, and so that you may look at yourself.
Okay, so here we have a voiceover. At least we know now that this is about an instructor who thinks a lot and is telling you a little bit about himself, and he walks up to the camera, and this is what he tells you. I think a lot, I reflect a lot, and I'm telling you that maybe you should do the same thing. So take a look at your own self. So here we have the linguistic elements added. We have a title now, so that sure helps us know what the video is supposed to be about. And then we have more than just him saying, look at yourself, right? We know now we have an idea of what it's about. So just with the linguistic elements, right, we add a lot to it. And let's see what we do next. So when we talk about linguistic mode, what I've been talking about a voiceover, so some more meta language. It's what I'm doing right now. I'm playing this PowerPoint presentation on my computer, and then I am recording this separately on with a microphone on a Zoom recorder, and I'm going to combine these in post. I'm going to voice over this video so that I can submit it to you for a lesson. So voiceover is another term. You're not looking at the camera talking into the camera, you're talking into a microphone and then layering that voice over your clips later in your editing program. So now we're going to add some oral elements. We're going to add some music. We're going to add some ambient sounds, birds. We're outside, so we need to play some birds, maybe a little bit of wind. You're also going to notice when I tap my phone, you're going to hear my finger tap the phone. I added that effect. And then I also edited the voiceover for a better sound. So I want to make it a little louder, a little clearer, sound a little better. And then I removed some of the other out-of-camera sound elements, some of the background noise that was going on. I think also I may have added, you can hear my footsteps in here now too. Let's play and see.
I walk. I contemplate life by myself in my yard. I wear mirrored sunglasses to metaphorically declare my own reflectiveness, and so that you may look at yourself.
So that's what happened here. You'll notice some of the fuzzy kind of noise that was in all of the in the clips before this one. You couldn't really hear that kind of hissing sound anymore. So I cleaned that up. I did also add footsteps. I could hear the footsteps when I walked towards the camera this time. Also noticed that it was a lot easier to hear the voiceover this time. So I must have up the volume on that, cleaned that up a little bit, made it a little fuller, made it sound a little better so that it was easier to hear, especially since I'm adding music now and sound effects in the background, the birds chirping. I definitely need to make sure you can hear the voiceover over those ambient sound effects and over that music. Also, think about the music here too. This music gives this shot, okay, this is the tone, this is the feeling. If I'd been playing like some Rage Against the Machine or death metal or some twangy country music, it would completely change the tone and mood of this shot. But this kind of, I don't know, somber piano music, I want to say thoughtful, pensive type of contemplative piano music, it helps to contribute to the message of this clip. Let's see, next. So then we start adding visual mode elements. Here I did a little color grading to just kind of, I think from what I'm looking at just in this shot right here, it looks like the shadows are a little cooler, a little bluer. But then I also did a little slow zoom in with the camera, and I added camera shake and some glow effects. So you'll notice in the left where the sunlight is hitting the side of the building that it seems to pop a little more than it did in the last one. Let's see. I'm going to go back real fast. Yeah, see in the last one, it's there, but it's not really popping. And then when I come in here, especially in the leaves across the top, you see this kind of almost like these little bubbles, these little bokeh balls. It kind of just adds this little bit of a glow effect to everything. And then when I talk about camera shaker, you'll notice that the shot is not perfectly still anymore. It's almost as if someone is holding the camera now, and it slowly kind of drifts around. So pay attention to that also. So let's see what happens after we add visual effects, kind of how it affects things.
I walk. I contemplate life by myself in my yard. I wear mirrored sunglasses to metaphorically declare my own reflectiveness, and so that you may look at yourself.
So what we have going on here, we have the lit areas are a little warmer, the shadowed areas are a little cooler. Also notice the camera zoomed in, so I'm a lot closer to the frame this time, which means I'm closer to you than I was before. So now it's a little more intimate, I guess, a little more, I'm a little closer to you, like we're having a conversation instead of me standing further away like I was in the other shots. And that's just slowly zooming the camera in. Now I didn't actually zoom the camera. The shot never changed. In post, I added a zoom effect so that the video editor slowly zoomed in, and then I had to pan this shot a little bit so that I finished on the left side of your screen. So there we add some visual elements. Now, a couple of things to talk about here. There are color corrections and color grades. You can read this if you want to. These are two different things. A color correction, let's say you film something and then you're looking at it later and all of your whites look kind of yellow and your skin tones look kind of pukey and green. You would do what's called a color correction, and a lot of times people just do what's called a white balance. Is they use a dropper and they put it on something in the image that's supposed to be white, and an algorithm turns anything like that pure white, and then it adjusts the rest of the image across the board to correct the color shift or the color tones. The color grade is more stylistic if you want like a dark, moody feel, or you want it to feel really warm outside or really cold outside. This is when you go in and you actually modify or manipulate the image to give it a stylistic look or a mood or a tone. So there's a difference between correct color corrections and color grades. Most of the time people start with, the first thing they do is they color correct their images, and then they tinker around with it and try to get a grade that they want to make it look like they want. But just more meta language, more jargon. And then here's some more visual mode. The camera shake I already talked about. This is a special effect that makes a video look as if they're filmed with someone by hand. And this is, you might not think this is important, but it is important because human beings don't stand perfectly still. We move around. We never sit perfectly still. We never see anything without motion. So this just adds that little tiny bit of motion that kind of brings the image to life a little bit. The glow effect is I talked about it briefly. It makes some images, some areas brighter or bloom. A lot of times you'll see, like in a movie, you'll see a candlelight and there's like this glow around it. That's what they named the glow effect for. People use a glow effect to create bloom where there's not bloom. And then to zoom in, I already talked about that earlier, but just some more jargon, more meta language for you to kind of wrap your head around. So now we're going to add spatial elements to the video. And here we want to place, by placing the subject between the written and the linguistic elements. And then we're going to add some sound effects to reinforce walking through this text element. So the title is going to pop up, and this time I'm going to walk through the title. And when I walk through the title, I'm going to use sound to emphasize that I have just passed through some barrier. Also, we're going to have a medium zoom, and we're going to pan to the right a little bit to bring me even closer to the viewer. And also, so I'm also panning this shot because I'm going to add this drop box onto the right-hand side of the screen so I can add this thought of the day element. So now this whole clip is turning into like this contemplative thought of the day kind of stuff. So let's watch it and see what happens when we start playing with the spatial elements a little bit.
I walk. I contemplate life by myself in my yard. I wear mirrored sunglasses to metaphorically declare my own reflectiveness.
Okay, so there's the whole thing. We've added all these different modes to it. It changes it, especially if you want to go back and watch the very first shot and then think about how much it changes as we start purposefully adding different modes and elements to it. The only thing that I did not add to this video were gestural elements, not in post. And there is a thing about gestural elements you have to keep in mind, right? You can add titles, and you can change colors, and you can zoom the camera in and out. You can add sound effects. But if the subject is looking directly at the camera, you can't make the subject not look directly at the camera later. If the subject is smiling, you can't make them frown. So the gestural elements are definitely probably the one mode that you really, really, really have to plan for when you're creating a multimodal text, because you can't change it later if you're doing something like this. Now, if you're drawing, if you're creating images, if you're using AI to create images, you can just go back in and say, I'll make them smile. But you can't do it with stuff like this. But just notice here, just me wearing the same hat and the same shirt and the same thing, right? In each shot, but each different shot, each different facial expression and the body language, it all changes what the image says. So when you can't see my eyes, but I'm gazing at the camera, it's kind of neutral. When I'm smiling, looking at the camera and smiling and gazing at the camera, it's a kind of a positive image. If my arms are down and I'm looking up, it could be neutral, positive, maybe hopeful, maybe triumphant. Maybe I see an airplane. And then here's a neutral mode doing an action. So it's when I cross my arms and I tilt my head down a little bit and I look up at you under my brow. It's kind of a negative image, angry, scary, maybe sad. And then when my arms are crossed, but I look up, it's just like I did in the image above, but I'm looking up this time. Now all of a sudden it's hopeful, it's thoughtful, or maybe I'm cold and there's a big cloud on the horizon. It depends on how you use the gestural mode. But remember what I talked about a moment ago, you can't change this in post. If someone is frowning in your shot, you can't make them not frown in the shot. It's what's called baked in. You can't fix it. So you really need to think about it ahead of time, and you really need to plan your gestural elements when you're storyboarding, when you're storyboarding or outlining or wireframing or whatever it is that you're doing, depending on what type of project you're trying to create. You really need to plan those gestural elements ahead of time so that you have the right ones in the shots, in the images where you want them, because they're really hard to take out later. Post-production is, I keep saying post and post-production and post-process. Most of the time it's just called in post. You'll hear someone say, in post I did this. What they're talking about is after they've gathered all their sound elements, after they gathered all their visual elements and whatever else it is that they're putting together to create a multimodal text, that's when they're in post doing their editing, doing their proofing, doing their color grading and their color correcting and all of these things. That's post, right? I've done all of the filming, I've done all the recording, I've got everything together, and now I'm in post and I'm putting it together. So talking again about adding gestural elements in post. Here is a picture of me, and let's say I was smiling, but I didn't. I was smiling in one image, and I had my arms crossed in another. But I wish that I was, smiling in image number 2 also. So I spent some time in Photoshop, cutting the smile from image 1 to paste it over the frown of image 2, and then so we end up getting image 3, and so you see the smile in image 1. It is the same exact smile that you see on the image on the far right. But the head down, the arms crossed, the eyes staring at the camera the way that they are, it goes from an angry to a very creepy, scary, it's very weird. I should be frowning in the last shot, but there's a smile on my face, which is very creepy and weird. And it just goes to show you how hard it is to edit gestural after it's baked into the image. But it also shows you how powerful the gestural mode can be. Those arms crossed and that head down like that compared to image 1 on the far left with the head up and the arms down, that completely changes the message, that completely changes the tone. It makes you think completely different things about the subject in the shot. So just really pay attention to that. Keep that in mind when you're creating your own projects. And also when you are doing your descriptive report, your first major assignment, how are the gestural elements, if there are any in your text, how are they playing into the message that your text is sending? And then this is just a look again. Let's see here. Yeah, so I'm still talking about the same thing, but there's image 1. There's a smile in image 1. Cut and paste into the smile in image 2. And it just goes from, okay, a positive picture to not a creepy picture. Weird. So there we go. So anyway, the takeaways here are things that I want you to take away from here are the elements of a text contribute to its meaning. And in this class, we're thinking of these elements as modes of meaning making. And there's 5 of them. We've been through each of them. Consider and plan how you will use the modes before and after you compose your initial drafts, your cuts, your takes, your recordings, etc. How will you use them? How can you use them to really get your message across, to really reach your audience? For your first major assignment, the descriptive report, really work on distinguishing how these different modes are used in the text that you analyze, so you can say, so that you can tell me they used the linguistic mode to convey this meaning. They reinforced it with this color choice. The subject's facial expression also adds to this message. So these things are things you really want to be paying attention to and looking at for your descriptive report. And that is it. Hooray, you made it through the first lesson. There will be more to come.